All right, so we're diving into something pretty interesting today. A story about legacy, ambition, and a company that's really looking to make a splash in the Indian jewelry market.
Yeah, it's really quite something. We've got this draft red herring prospectus, this DRHP, that gives us a glimpse behind the scenes as N Gadgil Jewellers gets ready for their IPO, their initial public offering. And on top of that, we've got this insightful report from Technopack about the overall Indian jewelry market, which it really adds a whole other dimension to our deep dive here.
It's kind of like your crash course, right?
Yeah.
On N Gadgil Jewellers, we're talking about a family business with roots going all the way back to, get this, 1897. And now they're aiming to, like, shake up the whole industry with some pretty ambitious expansion plans.
It's more than just raising capital, though, you know? This IPO, it's like N Gadgil is stepping onto a national stage, ready to challenge the giants. And the really fascinating thing is how they plan to use, their history, their deep roots, and their regional strength to make that leap.
Okay, so let's break this down. We know they officially became a company in 2013.
Right.
But they just transitioned from a private entity to a public one this year.
That's right, yeah. On April 5th, 2023 to be exact. Now they're operating as N Gadgil Jewellers Limited.
Gotcha.
And it's really important to understand, the driving force, the heart of it all is the Gadgil family.
Makes sense.
Yeah. The key promoters, the ones leading this IPO charge, are Savaviyadhar Gadgil, Ratika Sarab Gadgil, and the SVG Business Trust.
And we can see that family influence kind of woven throughout the company, right? You've got members like Parag Yashwant Gadgil holding key positions. He's an executive director.
Right, right. This deep family involvement, it's not uncommon, really, in the Indian jewelry market.
Right.
But it adds a really unique element to N Gadgil's story, don't you think?
Definitely.
It speaks to a legacy of craftsmanship and, like, a personal touch that they're bringing to a market that's, increasingly becoming all about big corporations.
Yeah, totally. So let's zoom in on the IPO itself for a sec. We're talking about a substantial offer size here.
Right. So the offer size is for a certain number of equity shares, and they're priced at euros each.
Yeah.
And, that totals up to a cool euro 11,000 million.
Wow, okay. And how's that structured?
So it's a combination of a fresh issue, which means they're releasing new shares onto the market.
Okay.
And then there's an offer for sale where existing shareholders, including the SVG Business Trust, are, that they're letting go of some of their holdings.
Gotcha. But the big question is, where is all that money going?
Well, a good chunk of it is earmarked for that, that big expansion we were talking about. Setting up 12 new stores just in Maharashtra is projected to cost about $3,869.76 million.
Wow.
They're really doubling down on their regional dominance there.
It's a bold move for sure.
Yeah.
Especially considering they're already the fastest growing organized player in the whole Indian market, at least based on revenue growth from 2021 to 2023.
It is. It is. But smart expansion, it needs smart financial management too.
Right, of course.
And that's where their plan to repay or prepay, existing borrowings comes in. As of February 29th of this year, those borrowings added up to, $3,774.48 million.
So using the IPO proceeds strategically like that really shows they're committed to long-term financial stability, right?
Exactly. It's all about thinking ahead.
Okay, and what about the money that's left over?
So the rest is allocated for, general corporate purposes,
Okay.
which could be anything from marketing and technology upgrades to, even boosting their online presence. It's like their war chest to stay competitive and agile in a market that's, constantly changing.
Makes sense. So they've got a solid plan that's clear.
Yeah.
But we can't just ignore the risks involved here.
Oh, absolutely not. And the DRHP itself, it actually points out several things that could impact their success.
Like what?
Well, one of the biggest ones is the competition. The Indian jewelry market is fierce. You've got big players like Tanishq, Kalyan Jewelers, Malabar Gold. They're all well established, and they have, tons of resources at their disposal.
It's like David going up against Goliath. You know what I mean? But N Gadgil has a few tricks up their sleeve.
Oh,
right?
for sure, for sure. Their strategy, it really hinges on a couple of key things. First, their brand recognition in Maharashtra it's huge. They're operating the state with the highest concentration of BIS-registered jewelry outlets in all of India.
So that gives them a real home field advantage.
Big time, yeah. And that BIS hallmark, it's not just a stamp.
Right.
It's a symbol of trust. And in a market where purity and quality are, they're everything, it's a major differentiator.
It shows they're committed to transparency and meeting those high standards.
Absolutely. And that resonates with consumers, especially in a market like India where trust is paramount.
Yeah, totally. But they're not just relying on their heritage, are they?
No, they're not. They're, actively shaping their future, too. The DRHP really emphasizes their diverse portfolio. Like, they have all these sub-brands,
Oh,
each one catering to a specific type of customer and different occasions.
I've seen that. They've got like Saptam for the traditional wedding jewelry, Swagia for the handcrafted pieces, Rings of Love for, the diamond engagement rings.
Exactly. They're really covering all their bases. It's not just about selling jewelry, it's about selling an experience, a connection to heritage, and, this understanding, this really nuanced understanding of their customer base. You can see it in their marketing.
Like their Dajikaka Promise Plan.
Yeah, that's a great example. They let customers lock in the current gold rate for future purchases. They're tapping into cultural practices and, uh, you know, addressing that concern about gold prices always fluctuating.
They're pretty clever, aligning their offerings with like the cultural and economic realities of their target market.
Totally. It's likely a big part of why they've been growing so fast.
But even with a strong brand and smart strategies, they still face some industry-specific challenges, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. One of the biggest ones is their reliance on those skilled artisans, the Karigars. Their craftsmanship. It's the heart of their intricate designs, making sure they have a consistent, skilled workforce. It's crucial, both for maintaining their quality and meeting demand.
And in a market as dynamic as this one, they have to be adaptable,
Right.
to all the changing trends and customer preferences. It's like sailing a ship in unpredictable waters. You need a skilled crew, and you got to keep an eye on the horizon.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of unpredictable waters, the DRHP, it actually acknowledges the impact of the bigger picture, the economic and political conditions, both in India and globally.
Makes sense.
Things like fluctuations in gold prices, changes in import duties, or, even something like currency depreciation. They can all affect their bottom line.
So how do they handle all that? I mean, they can't control the global economy.
Well, no, they can't. But what they can control are their internal operations, right? By focusing on efficiency, cost management, and diversification, they can build resilience and weather those storms.
It's like walking a tightrope,
Ah,
managing internal factors while staying flexible enough to adapt to things they can't control.
yeah.
And we can't forget about the regulatory stuff either.
Mhm.
Especially in the jewelry sector, it's pretty strict.
Absolutely. Things like compliance with hallmarking standards, ethical sourcing, and all the financial regulations, those are non-negotiable. But N Gadgil seems to be, ahead of the curve here.
Yeah, seems like it.
They adopted BIS hallmarking early on, even before it was mandatory in 2021, and they really emphasized their commitment to, sourcing conflict-free diamonds.
That's a smart move, especially now when people are so much more aware of ethical practices and sustainability and all that.
Definitely. It shows they're serious about compliance, which is, super important for keeping that consumer trust.
So we've got N Gadgil's background, their IPO plans, and the challenges. Now let's zoom out to the bigger picture, to the Indian jewelry market itself. This Technopack report paints a really interesting picture, right?
Oh, it does. It does. It's a market that's deeply rooted in tradition, but it's also going through some massive changes. The report starts by highlighting the growth of India's GDP, the per capita income, and, the whole retail sector just booming.
It even mentions that India's GDP has like almost doubled since 2015.
Right. And it doesn't look like it's slowing down anytime soon. With a growing middle class and more disposable income, people are spending more. And this is especially important for the jewelry sector because, well, gold holds a really deep cultural and economic significance in India.
It's not just about the money, right? It's
Yeah.
part of their customs, religious practices, and even, financial security.
Exactly. And this constant demand for gold, it's a major driver in the jewelry market's growth. The report says that a whopping 66% of gold consumption is for jewelry. And the rest, the remaining 34%, that's going to bars and coins.
It really highlights how culturally important gold jewelry is, beyond just its investment value.
It does, it does. And the report also points out that the price people pay for their gold, it's influenced by a bunch of global factors too.
Right, things like international gold prices, import duties, the value of the rupee against the dollar. It's a
Yeah.
lot to keep track of.
It is. It is. So we've got a market driven by tradition, fueled by a growing economy, but also vulnerable to these global forces. It creates a really unique dynamic, right?
Yeah, totally. And P and Gadgil has to navigate all of that. So how are they doing? I mean, they seem to have carved out a nice little niche for themselves.
They have. They have. We already talked about how strong they are regionally in Maharashtra, but the report goes even deeper. They achieved a 56.50% growth in their EBITDA, their earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization between 2021 and 2023.
That's a big jump. And EBITDA, that basically measures a company's operating profitability, right?
Right. Exactly. And that kind of growth means they're not just increasing their revenue, they're also becoming more efficient and profitable, which is a really good sign for potential investors.
It's like a well-oiled machine just humming along and getting results.
Yeah, a well-oiled machine. And the report also highlights their impressive return on equity, their ROE. Between 2021 and 2023, it really shot up.
Now, for those who aren't finance whizzes, can you explain what ROE actually means?
Sure. So ROE is basically a measure of how well a company is using its shareholders' investments to make money. A high ROE, that's usually a good indicator that they're financially healthy and have a lot of growth potential.
So they're making investors happy while expanding and strengthening their position in the market. It's a win-win.
Exactly, a win-win situation. And there's one more metric that I think is worth mentioning.
Okay, what's that?
They had the highest revenue per square foot in 2023 among all the major organized jewelry players.
Wow. Really? Okay, so they're making the absolute most of their retail space.
They are. They're attracting customers and, really maximizing sales within the space they already have.
That's impressive. It's like they're not just expanding for the sake of getting bigger. There's a real strategy behind it.
Right. It's all about sustainable and profitable operations, and they're clearly aware of how their market works.
Yeah, and they seem to get it.
Hmm.
But the Indian jewelry market, like any other, has been shaped by policies and regulations, right? Those things have had an impact over the years.
You're absolutely right. The Technopack report actually goes into the history of gold policies in India, highlighting some key moments that have really affected the industry.
Like what? What are some of the big ones that stand out?
Well, one we already talked about a bit back in 2013 when the Reserve Bank of India, the RBI, they put restrictions on gold imports to try and manage the country's current account deficit.
It's interesting how something like gold imports can have such a huge impact,
Yeah.
on the economy and even cultural practices.
It really does. And that move, it ended up causing domestic gold prices to surge because the supply tightened up. It created a really challenging environment for jewelry businesses.
So how did the government respond? I mean, they had to do something.
Well, they did. They recognized how important gold is to the Indian economy and how much it means culturally, so they eased up on some of those restrictions. They introduced schemes like the gold monetization scheme and the sovereign gold bond scheme.
So they encourage people to invest in gold in a different way, not just hoarding physical gold.
Exactly. And those schemes have been pretty successful. They've gotten people to put their gold to work and reduced how much India has to rely on gold imports.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And another big change happened in 2016 when the government made it mandatory to show a PAN card, a permanent account number, for any gold purchase over a certain amount.
That sounds like a way to keep better track of gold transactions, right? Maybe to prevent tax evasion or money laundering.
Exactly. It was all about trying to find that balance between regulating the market and recognizing how culturally and economically important gold is to India.
It's a delicate balance, for
Right.
sure. And it looks like N Gadgil has navigated these changes pretty well.
They have. They were early adopters of things like BIS hallmarking, which shows they understand that operating transparently and ethically, that's important in a regulated environment.
It's all about building trust, right?
Absolutely. It shows they're not just focused on making money, they're trying to be responsible players in the market. And their commitment to things like conflict-free diamonds, that just strengthens that image.
Yeah, it makes sense, especially now with people being so much more conscious of where things come from.
Right. It all comes down to them understanding their customers, their market, and how the whole industry is changing.
They're not just selling jewelry. They're selling an experience. They're selling trust, tradition, and, this connection to something bigger.
Mm.
But can a regional player really compete with the giants on a national level? I mean, that's the big question, right?
That's the multi-million-dollar question, literally. I mean, with their IPO, they're aiming for 11,000 million. Their success is going to depend on their ability to adapt, to evolve, to play to their strengths while, dealing with all the challenges of this market.
It's a really interesting journey to watch, and we're just getting started here.
One thing that really caught my eye in this Technopack report is how it highlights the changing ways people buy jewelry in India. It really digs into that whole online versus offline thing.
Yeah, for sure. I've definitely noticed more and more jewelry brands, building up their online presence. And it makes you wonder what's driving that, especially because buying jewelry has always been such a personal experience.
Convenience is a big one. Online platforms let people browse, like, tons of stuff from home, compare prices, read reviews, even try things on virtually, all at their own pace.
I can see that,
Yeah.
especially for someone who might, feel a little intimidated by the whole traditional jewelry store experience.
Yeah.
It's less pressure, right? You can take your time.
Exactly. And for a brand like N Gadgil, their main market is Maharashtra, but online platforms could give them a way to reach a much bigger audience, beyond just one region. It's a way to kind of test the waters in new markets before, committing to opening a store.
Like dipping their toes in before jumping in the pool.
Exactly. But the report also points out, it's not all smooth sailing for online jewelry retailers. There's that intangible aspect of buying jewelry, that touch and feel, the sparkle, the weight. It's hard to replicate that online.
Yeah, it's like the difference between seeing a picture of the sunset and actually being there.
Yeah.
Feeling the warmth and seeing the colors change.
That's a great analogy. And the report also says that customers, they might feel like there's more risk when buying jewelry online, especially, the really expensive stuff. Diamonds, for example. Understanding the cut, the clarity, the certifications, that's important. And it can be hard to get all that across online.
So it sounds like both online and offline have their pluses and minuses, right? It's not about one replacing the other. It's about finding that balance.
Exactly. And the smart brands, they get that. They're going for what they call an omni-channel approach. They're integrating both online and offline experiences. And N Gadgil, they're already doing that. They've got their website, they're on the big e-commerce platforms, and they've got their mobile app. They launched that back in March 2022.
So they're connecting with customers digitally, showing off their collections, and even offering online shopping. It's a more complete brand experience.
Right. They're not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Smart move. And this IPO, it could give them the resources to boost their online presence even more. Maybe investing in technology, building a better e-commerce platform, even looking into those virtual try-on experiences to bridge that gap between the digital and the physical.
It's all about keeping up with the times, meeting customers where they are, whether that's in a store or on their phone. Now, going back to their home turf, Maharashtra, the report actually has some interesting data about that market.
Oh, okay. What makes Maharashtra so unique when it comes to jewelry retail?
Well, first of all, Maharashtra has a higher per capita income than the national average. It's a big economic hub, lots of industry, a large population that's getting wealthier, and a strong demand for gold and jewelry.
So it's a market with a lot of potential for growth. But N Gadgil isn't just riding that wave. They're making things happen.
Exactly. And remember, we talked about their EBITDA growth. The report digs into their financials even more, and it's pretty insightful. Their revenue growth is great, but their return on equity, their ROE, between 2021 and 2023, that's what's really remarkable.
For those of us who aren't finance experts, could you break down what ROE actually means?
Sure. ROE is basically how effectively a company is using the money invested by its shareholders to generate profit. So if their ROE is growing, it means they're not just getting bigger, they're also getting better at using their resources to make money. It's a sign of a healthy company.
It's like that well-oiled machine again, running smoothly and getting results.
Exactly. And there's another metric that's worth noting. They had the highest revenue per square foot in 2023 compared to all the other big organized jewelry players.
Wow, that's impressive. They're really making the most of their space, drawing people in and maximizing sales.
Right. It shows they really understand their target market, and they've got a smart approach to their stores, how they display things, the whole customer experience.
It's clear they're not just expanding to expand. They've got a plan. They're focused on running things sustainably and profitably, and they know their market.
Absolutely. They're playing the game well. But remember, the Indian jewelry market, like any other market, has been shaped by policies and regulations.
Yeah, the Technopack report actually goes into the history of gold policies in India, pointing out some big moments that have impacted the industry. What were some of the key changes?
Well, we talked about one already back in 2013 when the Reserve Bank of India, the RBI, restricted gold imports to try and manage the country's current account deficit.
Right, right. It's fascinating how something like gold imports can have such a big ripple effect on the economy and culture.
It really does. And that move, it led to a surge in domestic gold prices because the supply got tighter. It made things tough for jewelry businesses. They had to adjust their strategies.
So what did the government do?
Well, they saw how important gold is to the Indian economy and culture, so they eventually eased up on some of those restrictions. They introduced things like the gold monetization scheme and the sovereign gold bond scheme to encourage people to invest in gold in a more, regulated and transparent way.
So instead of just holding on to physical gold, people were encouraged to invest in these schemes.
Exactly. And it's been pretty successful. It's helped to mobilize the gold that individuals are holding and reduce the pressure on the current account deficit.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Were there any other big changes?
Yeah, another big one came in 2016. The government made it mandatory for anyone buying gold over a certain amount to provide a PAN card, a permanent account number.
So they were trying to get a better handle on gold transactions, right?
Yeah.
To prevent things like tax evasion and money laundering.
Exactly. It was all about finding that balance between regulating the market and acknowledging how important gold is in India.
It's a tricky balance, and it looks like N Gadgil has done a good job navigating these changes.
They have. Their approach to compliance, like adopting BIS hallmarking early on, shows they get it. They understand that transparency and ethical practices are important, especially in a regulated environment.
It's all about building that trust.
Absolutely. And their commitment to things like conflict-free diamonds, that reinforces that image. It shows they're not just in it for the money, they're trying to be responsible. It really comes down to them understanding their customers, their market, and how the industry is changing.
They're not just selling jewelry, they're selling an experience, a connection to tradition, and a promise of quality and ethical practices. But can a regional player really make it on a national level? That's the question, right?
It is. It is. And with their IPO aiming for 11,000 million, it's a big question. Their success is going to depend on how well they can adapt, evolve, and use their strengths to overcome the challenges in this market.
It's a fascinating journey to follow, and we're just getting started. So we've talked about N Gadgil's ambitious plans, their strong financials, and all the complexities of the Indian jewelry market. What do you think, what really stands out as their biggest strength going into this IPO?
It's their understanding of their customers. It's really impressive. You can see it in everything they do. The sub-brands, the marketing, like that Dajikaka Promise plan, their focus on BIS, hallmarking, and conflict-free diamonds. They're not just selling jewelry, they're selling trust, tradition, that connection to something bigger.
Yeah, it's smart, especially in a market like India where tradition and culture are so important. But let's play devil's advocate for a minute. Their regional strength in Maharashtra is great, but could that actually hurt them as they try to go national?
That's a really good question. Dominating in Maharashtra is a great foundation, but going national means, understanding different cultural preferences, what people like in different regions. They might have to adjust their strategies, maybe tailor their designs or marketing to connect with a wider audience.
It's like learning a new language, right?
Yeah.
You can't just translate word for word. You have to understand the nuances.
Exactly. It'll be interesting to see how they handle that, balancing their heritage and what they know with, appealing to the whole country.
This IPO could be a make-or-break moment for N Gadgil Jewellers. It could launch them into the big leagues, but it also puts them in the spotlight. With more competition, more people watching.
Yeah, they're stepping into a whole new arena, going up against brands that are already established nationwide, brands with tons of resources. It'll be a real test. Can they be agile, adapt, and find a way to stand out?
It's like a high-stakes chess match.
Right. They have to think ahead, use their strengths, and be willing to take risks.
Their success isn't just about the numbers, though, right?
No, not at all. They need to tell a compelling story, connect with people, and show they can navigate, this ever-changing retail world.
It's a story about ambition, heritage, and knowing how to play the game. N Gadgil Jewellers is on the verge of something big, and this IPO could be the thing that makes or breaks them.
So to our listeners, I'd say, Don't just take our word for it. Go check out the DRHP for yourself.
Yeah, dive into the details, look at their financials, their plans for growth, the risks they've identified.
It's like solving a puzzle. We've given you some of the pieces, but seeing the whole picture, that's up to you.
Compare them to their competitors, see how they're positioning themselves, how they're planning to deal with the challenges and opportunities.
We've given you the information, now it's your turn to analyze it and make your own conclusions.
The Indian jewelry market is fascinating. It's tradition, innovation, economic forces all coming together. Whether you're an investor, a business enthusiast, or just curious, there's always something new to learn.
We hope this deep dive has made you curious, given you some insights, and maybe even inspired you to explore this market a bit more.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into N Gadgil Jewellers and their journey. Thanks for listening.